Welcome, bienvenidos, benvindo, to the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show, a production of Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here, the only English language podcast devoted to South America's premier club competition. I'm your host, Howard Hamilton, the founder of Soccermetrics. This is an off week for the Libertadores, and rather than take a 2-week break and return for match day 3, I'd like to step away from the frenzy of this season's competition and tell you some stories that provide greater context to South America's premier club competition. And that's what this episode will do. That said, there are news surrounding this edition of the Libertadores to report, and we'll start the show with this news roundup. Item 1, CONMEBOL investigation. Rosario Central has charged Peñarol with damage to the stadium occupied by their fans. Now, this relates to incidents that occurred on the first match day of Rosario Central's match against Peñarol. It was a match that Central won 1-0. Rosario Central submitted a 100-page document to CONMEBOL documenting incidents and damages that occurred during this match. There were press reports of Peñarol fans with fireworks inside the stadium. There were also reports of Rosario Central fans throwing barriers at Peñarol supporters. And more importantly, there was a report, and in fact there were images, of Maximiliano Oliveira of Peñarol hit by a rock. Oliveira was reported to suffer a concussion, and there were pictures of blood streaming down his face onto his jersey. For their part, Peñarol wants Rosario Central fans barred from the stadium in the return fixture, which will be match day 6 on May 28th. CONMEBOL has yet to make a decision as to any sanctions that will be levied against Rosario Central, but their next home match will be in match day 4, so it's almost certain that any kind of ruling will occur before that date. Item 2, site host for final. CONMEBOL has said that Buenos Aires will host the final of the Copa Libertadores this season, but they haven't confirmed which stadium will host the final. Last week, Alejandro Dominguez, president of CONMEBOL, visited Estadio Monumental, which is River Plate Stadium. He has also visited Estadio Cilindro, which is Racing Club Stadium, and La Bombonera, which is home of Boca Juniors. Peter Blanco, president of Racing Club, said that it would be impossible to host the final at their stadium, but they do desire to host it in the future. Now, it's very possible that CONMEBOL won't announce the stadium location until very late in the competition, and there are several reasons for these. By the later stages of the competition, CONMEBOL will have an idea of which clubs are likely to be represented in the final and the number of traveling fans each club will bring. And there is precedent for CONMEBOL waiting until very late to make their decision. Last season, CONMEBOL designated Montevideo, Uruguay as the location of the Copa Sudamericana final, but they switched the final from Estadio Centenario to a smaller stadium outside of Montevideo after Liga de Quito and Fortaleza were confirmed as the finalists. Item 3, Felipe Anderson to join Palmeiras. Felipe Anderson, who is a 31-year-old winger, signed a 3-year deal with Palmeiras on a free transfer from Lazio, and he will join up with the squad on July 1st. Anderson, who can play both sides or centrally, started his career with Brazil Santos and won the Libertadores in 2011. He went on to win the Olympic gold medal with Brazil's under-23 team in 2016. His European career has taken him to Lazio, then on to West Ham, with a loan period at Porto, before he returned to Lazio. Over his time with the other Roman team, he has appeared over 300 times for the side, scoring 58 goals and notching 63 assists across all competitions. And finally, item 4, Abel Ferreira not happy with Palmeiras' attendance. Palmeiras defeated Liverpool de Montevideo 3-1, coming back from an 0-1 deficit. The match featured the appearance of Esteval, who is a 16-year-old player who scored one of Palmeiras' 3 goals. That said, Ferreira was not happy with the fact that the Allianz Parque was half full. The attendance was reported to be at 28,000, and the stadium capacity supports well over 50,000, well over 55,000 actually. And he was quoted as saying, "Yes, I'd like to see the stadium full, and I didn't see that. The stadium always has to be full. This is Copa Libertadores. Our fans are probably worth about 30% of our team's performance. And in the previous match, we only saw 15% of that. And I want that to change." He's also asking for patience with the squad, which is a mix of young players, veterans, and stars. But with the addition of players such as Felipe Anderson, Palmeiras is almost certain to be a contender for the title, and not just contender for the title, contender to make a very deep run in this season's Libertadores. So that's the end of part 1. And in part 2, I'll go into tonight's history lesson. Part 2 of the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show, a production of Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. As I mentioned in the first episode, there is a rich history surrounding the Copa Libertadores, whether you talk about legendary teams, players, managers, or moments. Some of that history isn't necessarily known outside of South America. So this episode will be the first of a series of historical vignettes about the competition that I hope will present a fuller picture of South America's premier club competition. And we will start with a history of the Intercontinental Cup. Now, there were intercontinental club tournaments played in the years immediately following World War II. One of these tournaments was the Pequeña Copa del Mundo, held in Venezuela between 1952 and 1957. It was an 8-team competition composed of 4 European teams and 4 South American teams. It wasn't organized by a confederation, but rather by a sports management company in Caracas, and it was an invitation-only tournament. Real Madrid won the competition twice, FC Barcelona won once, and Millonarios, Corinthians, and Sao Paulo were also victorious. While these clubs highlight this competition among their honors, neither UEFA, CONMEBOL, nor FIFA recognize the winners as being intercontinental champions, or even world champions. The first mentions of an Intercontinental Cup arose in the late 1950s, when both Europe and South America were creating their respective continental club competitions. At a UEFA meeting in October 1958, João Havelange, who at the time was president of the Brazilian Football Association and attending as an observer, announced that the Copa Libertadores was coming. One Brazilian newspaper states that Havelange and French journalist Jacques Godet, one of the founding fathers of the European Cup, came up with the idea of the Intercontinental Cup. Other media outlets claim that Henri Delaunay, the Secretary General of UEFA, proposed that the European and South American club champions meet in an Intercontinental Cup. 1 year before this UEFA meeting, Real Madrid, who won the first European Champions Cup in 1956 and would go on to win the first five competitions, faced Vasco da Gama in the Tournoi de Paris. It was dubbed as a match featuring, quote, the best team in Europe versus the best team in South America, end quote. Now, there is no way to prove this tag in the case of the South American representative because there was no South American club competition at the time, and there wasn't even a Brazilian national championship. Vasco were the champions of Rio de Janeiro, and Rio were the stronger of the two centers of Brazilian football at that time. At any rate, Vasco would go on to win the competition by 4-3, a sensational result which, coupled with the Brazilians winning the 1958 World Cup, alerted the Europeans to the quality of South American football and motivated the creation of the Intercontinental Cup. So, the Intercontinental Cup was born. Now, officially, it was the European South American Cup, initiated by UEFA with CONMEBOL support. But everyone called it the Intercontinental Cup. And some people were bold enough to call it the World Club Cup. Now, was this Intercontinental Cup an official match? Well, yes and no. FIFA refused to endorse the competition and would only allow it to be played if the confederations classified the match as a, quote, private friendly match. And that designation will have implications later on. Yet, the match meant something to its participants. UEFA and CONMEBOL would endorse the competition jointly, and to this day, both confederations list the results of the competition among their official records. And as would become apparent almost immediately, the South American representatives would take the competition very seriously. Too seriously, in fact. Now, between 1960 and 1979, the Intercontinental Cup was played as a two-leg series. From 1960 to 1968, the series was decided by results only. 2 points for a win or 1 point for a draw. So if a team won both matches, or if a team won the first match and drew the second, both outcomes were enough to win the tie. If both teams won the first two legs, or if both matches ended in a draw, a third match was played on a neutral site. Now, in the first edition of the Intercontinental Cup in 1960, Real Madrid defeated Peñarol of Uruguay over two matches. They drew the first match goalless in Montevideo, and they routed Peñarol 5-1 in Madrid. Ferenc Puskás, the great Hungarian forward, scored 2 goals in the opening 10 minutes. And in between his goals, Alfredo Di Stefano, the great Argentine striker, contributed with his goal. Jesus Herrera and Paco Gento contributed for the Whites, while Alberto Spencer, the great Ecuadorian forward and the all-time leading goal scorer in Copa Libertadores, scored the lone goal for Peñarol. Peñarol would go on to be the first South American winner of the Intercontinental Cup in 1961. They defeated Portugal's Benfica over 3 matches. They lost the first leg 1-0 in Lisbon, but routed Benfica 5-0 in Montevideo and defeated them in the decider 2-1. Over the 3 matches, Alberto Spencer and Juan Hoya scored twice, particularly in the second match, and Jose Sacia scored 3 goals, including 2 goals in the decider. Peñarol would also defeat Real Madrid in 1966 to win their second Intercontinental, winning both legs by a score of 2-0. Peñarol's Intercontinental Cup victory in 1961 started a streak of 3 Intercontinental wins by South American sides. And the greatest of those wins was Santos FC's Intercontinental Cups in 1962 and 1963. Santos, who were called Os Santasticos, are considered by some as among the best club sides ever. Between 1959 and 1974, they won 25 official trophies, including 2 Copa Libertadores and 2 Intercontinental Cups. But that 1962 side was the pinnacle of this golden era for Santos. They won the Sao Paulo Championship, they won the Brazilian Cup, and they would win Copa Libertadores. And they had sensational players such as Gilmar, Mauro, and Mengalvio. But by far the greatest player was Pele. And I'm sure all of us know how great a player he was. They defeated Benfica in 1962, defeating the European champions 3-2 in Sao Paulo and routing them 5-2 in Lisbon. Probably one of the greatest results by a South American club team on European soil. Pele scored a hat trick in the second match, the only hat trick in the Intercontinental Cup history. Pele would go on to score more goals in Intercontinental Cups than any other player. Now, the Southern European teams, and I'm referring to Spain and Italy. We can mention France, but France has not had a representative at the Intercontinental Cup. Were more prepared for these match conditions. Inter Milan won Intercontinental Cup on 2 occasions in 1964 and 1965 against Argentina's Independiente. And Estudiantes de La Plata would make the first of 3 appearances in the late 1960s. In 1968, they defeated Manchester United, winning the first match 1-0 in Buenos Aires and drawing 1-1 at Old Trafford. The first leg was notable for extremely physical conduct on the part of Estudiantes toward Manchester United players. In the run-up to the match, Otto Gloria, who was the manager of Benfica, who Manchester United defeated in the European Cup final, described United midfielder Nabi Styles as, quote, an assassin. And in the official program, he was quoted as saying that Styles was, quote, brutal, badly intentioned, and a bad sportsman. Now, this didn't go over very well with the Manchester United officials or with manager Matt Busby, but the damage was done. Styles would be marked for extremely rough treatment. Carlos Bilardo, who was a midfielder, defender for Estudiantes, stood out particularly for his rough play. And by the end of the match, Styles had had enough of being kicked and punched by Estudiantes players, and he retaliated. And naturally, what happens when a player retaliates is that the referee notices and sends that player off. Bobby Charlton also received stitches on his head. And there are some other injuries to Manchester United players as well. The second leg in Manchester was also a physical encounter. But that match and that tie was effectively settled when Juan Ferron scored on a free kick in the first 10 minutes of the match. Later on, George Best and Jose Medina were sent off for either side. But the match that stood out during that period for rough conduct was the 1967 Intercontinental Cup between Celtic and Racing Club the previous year. The Lisbon Lions won 1-0 in Hampton Park, And after that match, they embarked on a 20-hour flight from Glasgow to Buenos Aires on Aerolíneas Argentinas. That was actually a very fast flight for that era. Over 100 Celtic fans made the trek from Scotland to Argentina, and their flight took close to 30 hours. But when they arrived in the stadium, they were shocked to find out that their seats were taken up by the locals, and when they were trying to sell the matter, they were doused with urine from the upper decks of the stadium. In the in the in the preview of the match, in the warm-up of the match, Ronnie Simpson, the goalkeeper for Celtic, was struck in the head by a piece of metal. So, bleeding profusely and concussed, he was not able to play. So the match went on. It stood out for extremely rough conduct on the part of the Racing players. Racing would go on to win 2-1. And it was notable that Celtic players were kicked, they were punched, and they were spat upon. I recall reading one account of Celtic's encounter against Racing Avellaneda, and Celtic player Tommy Gemmel's hair was congealed with saliva from being spat upon by Racing players. So naturally, there was some debate within the Celtic leadership on where to stay for the third match. The chairman of Celtic at the time wanted to leave, but several board members, including manager Jock Stein, elected to stay. Jock Stein was particularly adamant in believing that his squad was capable of defeating Racing anywhere, and he really wanted to finish what he started in this competition. Stein would later go on to regret his decision. So in the third match, 4 days later, Racing would win 1-0 in Montevideo. This match stood out for a number of reasons. One, over 30,000 Racing fans made the 4-hour ferry ride between Buenos Aires and Montevideo, and a number of them chose to serenade Celtic's official hotel at 2 o'clock in the morning. The match would go on to be called, quote, the Battle of Montevideo. And you really don't want a football match to be called a battle. And in this case, it really was. It was literally a street fight. It was a match that was not controlled very well by the referee. There were 51 fouls that were called, 30 of which by Celtic. And there were 6 players who were sent off. 4 players by Celtic and 2 Racing players. Yet, the match was so poorly controlled by the referee that Bertie Auld, a Celtic player who was sent off late, stayed on the field, and the referee didn't even notice. So Racing were world champions. They were the first Argentine side to win the Copa Intercontinental. But it was poorly received in Uruguay. The players attempted to take a lap of honor, and they were jeered by the Uruguayan public, and debris was thrown on them as well. A headline in Uruguay's newspaper El Dia said, Racing win the World War. And the article would go on to say, or at least the columnist would go on to say, quote, the match was a farce and a fraud. So from 1969 to 1979, the 2-leg series was decided on aggregate goals, with penalty kicks if necessary after the second leg. Now, the first match in this new format was the 1969 Intercontinental Cup between AC Milan and Estudiantes de La Plata. And if the events of 1967 stood out for its rough play, those events would pale in comparison to what happened in Argentina in 1969. So the bare facts of the series: Milan won the first leg 3-0 in the San Siro. Estudiantes would win the second leg 2-1 in La Bombonera in Boca Juniors ground because Estudiantes' ground was not suitable for the Intercontinental Cup. But the results of this match are really a sideshow to what occurred. And it stood out by really disgraceful, really thuggish behavior by the Estudiantes players. So in the warm-up of the match, Alberto Poletti, who was the goalkeeper for Estudiantes, and Ramon Aguirre Suarez, a defender, intimidated Milan players, at least attempted to intimidate them during the warm-up. In the match itself, Eduardo Manera bit a Milan player, Cel Malatrasi, and Poletti punched Milan forward Gigi Rivera. But the Milan player who received the worst treatment was Nestor Combin. Combin, who was born in Argentina but played for France as a professional, was seen as a traitor by not just the opposing Estudiantes players, but also by the Argentine public. His nose was broken by Aguirre Suarez, and he was kicked in the face by goalkeeper Poletti, resulting in what has to be termed as a concussion. Yet, the most farcical event in this match was that as Combin was carried off on a stretcher, he was arrested by federal police on charges that he had evaded Argentina's national military service. And while he was trying to prove to the police that no, he is not eligible, he is not required to um, he's not required to do military service because he had already done that in France, where he was a citizen, he had to spend the night in jail. Gazzetta dello Sport, which is the great Italian sports daily, called this match 90 minutes of a manhunt. One of the Argentine press outlets, in one of their articles summarizing this match, said, quote, "The English were right." And that was a reference to what English manager Alf Ramsey said in the 1966 World Cup when he described the Argentine players as animals, quote unquote. And Argentine sports magazine El Gráfico described the match as, quote, "the darkest page in the history of Argentine football." Journalist Julio Cesar Pasquato had this to say about the events that occurred in this match. Quote, "No, Estudiantes, that was not manhood. It was not temperament. It was not spirit. This has been apologetics for brutality and madness. This has embarrassed us all, and those responsible should be ashamed. If we really want to continue believing in something in the future, let's start by repudiating this unfortunate episode." End quote. Now, in the fallout of this match, the Argentine government, which at the time was a military government, pressured Argentina's Football Association to do something. The federation ended up banning Poletti for life. Aguirre Suarez was banned for 30 matches, and Eduardo Manera was handed a 20-match ban. FIFA were called in to impose further sanctions on the players and on the club, but they refused because, after all, it's just a friendly. So between 1960 and 1969, CONMEBOL teams won 6 times in the Intercontinental Cup, and UEFA clubs won 4 times. But in the fallout to the events of 1969, European winners decided that it really wasn't worth their while to participate in the Intercontinental Cup. So the English clubs were definitely done with the competition. Northern European teams were done with the competition. And European winners did not want to participate if an Argentine or Uruguayan club were present. So that meant in 1971, Ajax refused to participate in the Intercontinental Cup, and Panathinaikos, who were the finalists, came and participated in their place. One of their players suffered a severe leg break by an opposing player, by a player for Uruguay's Nacional, and he never played professional football again. European winners would go on to refuse to participate in 1973, 1974, 1975, 77, 78, and 1979. In 1975, neither Bayern Munich, who won the European Cup, nor Leeds United, who were the other finalists, would participate in the Intercontinental Cup. So that cup was not held in that season. In 1978, Liverpool, the European champions, refused to participate, so that cup was not played as well. So matches that stand out in the 1970s were Ajax's series against Argentina's Independiente. Ajax, who were led by Johan Cruyff, was threatened by Independiente's Barras in the run-up to the match in Buenos Aires. So Ajax brought their own security detail. Cruyff scored the early goal in Buenos Aires, and he got taken out almost immediately afterward by a violent tackle. At halftime, the Ajax team had to be talked into continuing the match. They decided to continue on. They drew 1-1 in Buenos Aires, and they would go on to win the Intercontinental Cup by a 3-0 victory in Amsterdam. In 1976, Bayern Munich were drawn against Cruzeiro, who were the European champions. And that year, Bayern did choose to participate in the Intercontinental Cup. Now, they would claim that it was merely scheduling and economics that made it difficult to participate. But I think it's clear that Bayern Munich were willing to participate if an Argentine or Uruguayan team were not present. But they did have a point about the economics of the competition. Their home leg, which was held in December in Munich, drew 18,000 because of cold weather. So as a result, Bayern lost money on the tie. And when you factor in the travel, when you factor in the cost of operating the stadium, Bayern lost money. And that was an ongoing theme by European teams in the latter part of the 1970s. So by 1979, when Paraguay's Olimpia faced Malmö, Malmö were the runners-up to Nottingham Forest, who refused to participate in the Intercontinental Cup. The match in Sweden drew less than 5,000 spectators. Olimpia won both legs of the competition to become Intercontinental champions. So quoted in the Spanish newspaper, what had happened was that, quote, "The truth is that the Intercontinental Cup is an adventitious competition without foundation," stated Spanish newspaper Mundo Deportivo. "It has no known owner, depends on a strange consensus, and the interested clubs are not tempted to risk much for so little money, as evidenced by the attendance at the game in Malmö." And that was very true. So during the 1970s, CONMEBOL teams won 4 times. UEFA teams were more successful during the 70s. They won 5 occasions. but two of those matches were canceled. So the Intercontinental Cup was at a crossroads, and something had to be done. Now, throughout the previous 20 years, there had been various proposals and suggestions to expand the Intercontinental Cup in order to make it a true world championship. In 1967, the Asian Football Confederation and CONCACAF requested to join the Intercontinental Cup. UEFA and CONMEBOL were not supportive of such a move. In 1970, FIFA stepped up and expressed a willingness to organize an Intercontinental Cup competition if the other confederations were allowed to participate. Again, UEFA and CONMEBOL were opposed to the idea. In 1973, the French sports daily L'Equipe, who had come up with the idea of the European Champions Cup, wanted to sponsor a Club World Cup. So, a competition that had the European South American champions, plus the champions of Africa and North and Central America, or CONCACAF. So this tournament was scheduled to take place in September and October of 1974, with the final at the Parc des Princes. In contrast to previous attempts at an expanded Intercontinental Cup, CONMEBOL were actually supportive of this idea. But in this situation, UEFA remained opposed. Now, in 1974, João Havelange, who had just been elected president of FIFA, proposed the Club World Cup, but that proposal didn't get anywhere. In 1975, L'Equipe tried again with its proposal, but they expanded the scope of the competition to include the European Cup semifinalists, the Libertadores finalists, and the champions of Africa and Asia. UEFA remained opposed. And in 1980, the Mexican Federation lobbied to join the Intercontinental Cup after its member clubs won the Inter-American Cup. Now, the Inter-American Cup was a competition that was formed in the late 1960s between the champions of CONCACAF's club competition and CONMEBOL's club competition. It wasn't always played, but a condition of playing that match was that the winner of the Inter-American Cup would go on to participate in the Intercontinental Cup. Now, in practice, that never happened. So, by the end of the 1970s, the Intercontinental Cup persisted. The South Americans liked the prestige, they liked the opportunity for bragging rights, and they didn't want to share the spotlight with supposedly lesser confederations. The Europeans came to see it as a nuisance, a time and money waster, and not worth the risk to its players. And they were definitely done with traveling to South America. So what happened? In 1980, UEFA and CONMEBOL hired the British sports marketing company West Nally to find an alternative. And the alternative that this company determined was to have a large multinational take over the competition. In this case, it was Toyota Motor Corporation who took over the Intercontinental Cup and rebranded it the Toyota Cup. So the new format of this competition would be a one-match final in Tokyo's National Stadium in December. Toyota would supply the prize money, about $200,000 per club. They would supply additional prizes to the best player. It eventually became a brand new car to the best player on field. And a really clever thing that Toyota insisted upon was that the European representatives were required to participate in that competition. Now, the South Americans never needed any encouraging to participate in the Intercontinental Cup. But Toyota, through UEFA, worked in worked in the yearly contract for the European Cup that clubs participating in the European Cup must agree to participate in the Toyota Cup. And if they fail to do so, they would be subject to legal penalties by UEFA and Toyota. So with Toyota's support and with a neutral site in a country that was relatively new to football, there was a soccer competition in Japan, but the J League was still a decade away. European clubs warmed back to participating in the Intercontinental Cup. English clubs really didn't like the Intercontinental Cup very much, even with the new management. So in the early 1980s, the English FA proposed their own version of a Club World Cup that would take place in 1985, organized by West Nally. UEFA put the kibosh on that idea. So the Toyota Cup, so the Intercontinental Cup became the Toyota Cup. For the South Americans, it was the climax of the club season. And the Copa Libertadores became not just an opportunity to establish bragging rights in the continent, it also provided an opportunity for clubs and their supporters to go to Japan later on in the year. It was the ultimate carrot to these clubs. And in fact, in Brazil, Copa Libertadores was called Project Tokyo. So in the first 5 years of the competition, from 1980 to 1984, South American teams dominated. Now, coincidentally, the teams that they faced were English champions of Europe. So Liverpool, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, Hamburg 1 year. Nacional of Uruguay, Brazil's Flamengo, Uruguay's Peñarol, Brazil's Grêmio, and Argentina's Independiente were victorious in the early editions of the Toyota Cup. Now, the addition of the Toyota Cup that really changed everything in terms of the quality of play, in terms of the commitment of both sides, was the '85 Toyota Cup between Argentinos Juniors and Juventus. Argentinos Juniors are, I don't think I'm being disrespectful by describing them as a provincial side. They're a neighborhood side, but they had a very cohesive team. They had a very solid youth development system. Diego Maradona is probably their most famous graduate. And they had won a national championship in Argentina. They had gone on to win the Copa Libertadores. They defeated Atlético Nacional in penalties in the final. And they would go on to play the best match in the history of the Toyota Cup. Argentinos were known for playing a possession style of football, quick passing on the ground, sharp combinations with lots of off-ball movement. And they were led by Claudio Borghi in the middle and Sergio Batista in front, both of whom would figure in Argentina's World Cup winning squad in 1986. Now, Juventus had star power of its own, huge amount of star power. Michel Platini, Michael Laudrup, Gaetano Scirea, Aldo Serena. And they had won the European Champions Cup in a match that was unfortunately marred by the Heysel tragedy. Now, all the goals in this match were of extremely high quality, but The play in between all those goals and before those goals is also worth watching. Uh, you can find videos of the goals. You can find videos of the entire match on YouTube. And I highly recommend that you watch the match because it really is an enjoyable match to watch. Juve would go on to win that match 4-2 on penalties after a 2-2 draw after 120 minutes. That match was the start of not necessarily European domination, but European teams became a lot more successful in the competition. Porto won in 1987, and AC Milan, at the start of their golden era, would win a Toyota Cup in 1989. So by the end of the 1980s, CONMEBOL had won 7 times in the Toyota Cup, and UEFA clubs had 3 victories. By the 1990s, European clubs took command of the Toyota Cup. And there were a number of reasons for this. One, the European representatives were taking this competition a lot more seriously. And two, the increased movement of players, especially after the Bosman ruling, resulted in European clubs buying up the best South American players. When you combine that with deeper squads and better preparation, the quality of the European clubs stood out against the South American teams, which are still riding a lot of their previous reputation. And by the end of the 1990s, they were less able to play. They were less able to be competitive against their European counterparts while remaining faithful to their own standard of football. AC Milan won another Toyota Cup in 1990, followed by Red Star Belgrade in 1991. Yet in the 1990s, 2 South American clubs stand out for um, for winning for winning the Toyota Cup, for winning the Intercontinental Cup during this period. The first club was Sao Paulo FC in 1992 and 1993. Sao Paulo were led by Tele Santana, who was the manager of Brazil's national team in the 1982 World Cup, considered by many to be the best national side that never won the World Cup. But he applied his philosophy of football from that 92 side to the club side, Sao Paulo. He joined the side in the early 1990s and became extremely successful. The leader of that team was Rai, who was Socrates' younger brother. There were other players such as Toninho Cerezo, Cafu, Leonardo, Juninho, a young Rogerio Ceni in goalkeeper, although he didn't play much in those two matches. And Sao Paulo were essentially one of the last great South American super clubs, a team that could be faithful to its own brand of football and be extremely competitive with the top European sides. In 1992, they defeated Barcelona 2-1, and in 1993, they defeated Milan 3-2 in an extremely exciting match in Tokyo. The other South American team that achieved success in the 1990s was Vélez Sarsfield in 1994. They were managed by Carlos Bianchi, and their chief players were Roberto Trotta, Omar Saad, and in goal, Jose Luis Chilavert, who is really a force of nature. They were facing a Milan side that had just routed FC Barcelona in the Champions League final, and really one of the most perfect performances in a Champions League final. So it was widely expected that Milan would win comfortably. And several officials believed that would indeed happen. In fact, Silvio Berlusconi, who was the owner of Milan, at the time he was also Prime Minister of Italy, called Villa Sarsfield a third division team. But the final result told a different story. Milan won 2-0. Trotta scored a penalty, and Assad scored second off a disastrous giveaway that Milan suffered in their own defensive half. However, European clubs would go on to win the next 5 Toyota Cups. The closest that South American side would get would be in 1995 when Ajax defeated Gremio on penalties. But Juventus, Borussia Dortmund, and Real Madrid achieved victories in Tokyo. In 1999, an English club got on the act, Manchester United becoming the first English winner of the Toyota Cup to complete a unique quadruple. So, in the period between 1990 and 1999, CONMEBOL teams achieved 3 victories in the Toyota Cup, and UEFA achieved 7. So at the turn of the 21st century, the last great South American champion emerged, and that was Boca Juniors in 2000. Boca Juniors was managed by Carlos Bianchi, who had left Vélez, gone over to Boca, and eventually built an all-conquering side. The 2000 final against Real Madrid was perhaps the last really great performance by a South American team in the Intercontinental Cup. And I had the privilege of watching that match live. The first 10 minutes of that match will probably go down as the greatest 10 minutes in the history of Boca Juniors. Martin Palermo scored twice. Juan Roman Riquelme in midfield was absolutely brilliant. Real Madrid scored a goal through Roberto Carlos, which is a sensational goal. But Boca played the better football. They deserved that 2-1 win, and they were the last South American champion that were faithful to their style of football during their match. In 2001, Boca would return to the Intercontinental Cup, this time against Bayern Munich, and they lost 1-0 after extra time. But in 2003, they would win the Intercontinental Cup again on penalties after a 1-1 draw against AC Milan. Incidentally, that match stands out to me because it was also the same day that the U.S. captured Saddam Hussein. I remember going on La Nacion's website to find out what happened in the Milan match, and in blurring headlines, I saw something completely different. So from 2000 to 2004, when the Toyota Cup concluded and was subsumed by FIFA's new Club World Cup competition, CONMEBOL teams won 2 times, and UEFA teams won 3 times. So Bayern Munich won once, Real Madrid won in 2002, and Porto also won. Porto won in 2004. So by then, the momentum had really shifted in international football, and it was hard to deny the Asian, African, North American champions their seats at the table. And by then, FIFA saw an opportunity to make money, of course. And that led to the FIFA Club World Cup in 2000. Well, it was initially supposed to occur in 2000, but because of the bankruptcy of FIFA's media partner, it was pushed back to 2001. That competition was open to club continental champions plus the local champions, in this case, the Brazilian champion. So, and the first edition was held in Brazil. And then by 2004, the Intercontinental Cup was no more. So, to close the book on the Intercontinental Cup, it was played 43 times. CONMEBOL teams won 22 times, 13 clubs among 4 countries, and UEFA won the competition 21 times. 12 clubs won the competition among 7 countries. The most lopsided result of the competition in the pre-Toyota Cup era was that 5-0 victory by Peñarol against Benfica in 1961. On 3 occasions in the Toyota Cup era, there was a scoreline of 3-0. So the Intercontinental Cup is gone, but now it's back. And now it is back under the auspices of FIFA. Now, what used to be an Intercontinental Cup became the FIFA Club World Cup, which is now a new competition, which will be held every 4 years. The FIFA Intercontinental Cup is a yearly tournament that starts this year in 2024. And that competition will be composed of the club champions from Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Oceania, and Europe. And the European champion will receive a bye to the final. The tournament is organized like this. The Oceania champion will play either the champion from Asia or Africa. The winner of that first round match will play the opposite team, either the Asian or African team that was not chosen in the first round. And the CONCACAF champion will play the CONMEBOL champion. In the third round, which will be played at a neutral site, the second round winners will play each other. And the final, which will also be played at a neutral site, the third round winner will play the European Champions League winner. So it's a departure from previous versions of the competition where the South American champion received a bye to a semifinal round. And it's probably recognition of the fact that the winners outside of South America are not just competitive against the South American champion. On occasion, those teams from the other confederations have demonstrated their ability to beat the South American champions. So the South American champion no longer gets the benefit of a bye as had occurred in previous editions of the FIFA Club World Cup. I actually like this format. It's one of those formats that you wonder, well, what took them so long to come up with a format like this? And I think what took so long was that the South American champion had, for a long time, was able to claim some degree of parity with the European champion. And things have changed so much, particularly since 1990, that is no longer the case. And the performance of the South American champions in the FIFA Club World Cup has greatly reduced the ability of the South American champion to be able to say they deserve a bye to the later stages of the competition. So it's a little sad in a way, because if you remember the history of the Intercontinental Cup and you remember just the greatness of those South American sides, the fact that they're no longer deserving of a bye is a little shocking, but it has led us into a format that I think makes a lot more sense in an Intercontinental Cup format that incorporates all the club champions around the world. Now, where does the original Intercontinental Cup stand? Now, FIFA sees original Intercontinental Cup as a predecessor to the FIFA Club World Cup. In fact, FIFA has changed their stance from viewing it as a glorified friendly to a situation where in 2017, the FIFA Council designated the winners of the Intercontinental Cup as Club World Champions, on par with FIFA's Club World Cup winners. So what has the Intercontinental Cup meant? I think the Intercontinental Cup provided a chance for the South American sides to prove their ability versus the wealth of the European clubs against the might of the European champions. And the performances by those South American champions rank among the greatest hours of those clubs. Even if those clubs were not successful, the opportunity to perform at the absolute highest stage was extremely valuable, not just from a player standpoint, but also for the prestige of the club. And in my opinion, the best form of this competition was in Japan for so many reasons. I think Japan was a really great host. Toyota was a really great sponsor. It was a neutral site, so it reduced the barrier for the European clubs to compete. The final record of the competition does show parity between CONMEBOL and UEFA, but I think it is a misleading parity because by the mid-1990s, the gap between the European and South American clubs was starting to become apparent. And by the end of the 1990s, the superiority of the European clubs was beyond question. Notwithstanding the performance of Boca Juniors, notwithstanding the performance of Sao Paulo, I think it's also apparent that those were the last gasps of South American competitiveness in the Intercontinental Cup, which is hard to say as a fan of South American football. But the ball is round, as the saying goes about football, and over 90 or 120 minutes of Tokyo, 90 or 100 minutes and 90 or 120 minutes in Tokyo, the Intercontinental Cup has demonstrated precisely that. Now, if you want to follow me and send a comment or a question, my X handle is @Soccermetrics. You can also send questions or comments to @SoccerDownHere or Jason Longshore @Longshoe. We will answer your questions about the tournament in a future episode, and as always, we appreciate your comments on the show. The group stage of the Copa Libertadores resumes next week with the third match day, so I'll be back on Monday to preview those matches. This has been the Soccermetrics Copa Libertadores show, a production of Soccermetrics and Soccer Down Here. See you later. Hasta luego. And ante más.